I'm with Professor Martin McKee. Martin, hello. Thank you very much for coming in from the European Public Health London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Have you got all that on your badge? Can you get it?
We abbreviate it.
Yeah, please you did. But it's a great chapter. It's chapter 6. Mm-hmm. And you could argue that it's the chapter that underpins the rest of the whole report because it's about demographics.
That's right.
Tell me about the chapter.
We were asked to look at what the United Kingdom population would look like in 2040 because, as you say, we need to understand who is living in the country, who will be working in the NHS, who will be benefiting from the NHS in the future as we go forward. And of course the challenge is that we actually don't know because there are so many uncertainties at the minute. The population is influenced by 3 major inputs: the birth rate, the death rate, the migration rate. And we have good reason to believe that all 3 may be very difficult to predict. First of all, one of the issues is that there are almost certainly going to be fewer people coming from the rest of the European Union. That's already happening. We've seen the number of recruits to nursing from other countries falling off a cliff, over 90% decline. And that is a group, of course, that are contributing to the birth rate. So we will expect to see a decline in that. But there are other factors because as we look at the general climate of austerity and uncertainty, we see that birth rates fall too. And this has always been the case at times of economic crisis. And
that's really interesting because I've been talking to all the chapter leads and the theme that comes out so often is social deprivation and the impact, the social determinants of health. It has a huge impact.
I think what we're seeing now is the growth of the concept of precariousness. Now, this is something that was well described, particularly in the French literature up until about 2012, but it was only more recently it's being taken note of in the English literature, and we're seeing the precariousness or uncertainty about employment, income, housing, and increasingly in the United Kingdom, even food supply with the growth of food banks. All of these things create a degree of uncertainty looking forward that make people less willing to think about having families, not knowing what the world will look like.
Talk to me about ageing. We're an ageing society, I think. I don't know, maybe we're not. But if you take my generation, I mean, I'm in my mid-70s, so I've had a soft life, really. I mean, I haven't come through a war. I've had good employment. I've never smoked. I'm well nourished. If you look at my parents' generation, they'd been through a war and all the stress and pressures of that, the legacy of an industrial past, and then their parents' generation, in the horse and cart era. My great-grandfather was a greengrocer who sold his stuff with a horse and cart around the streets of London. So, I mean, 3 generations, 3 big shifts. We should be healthier, we should be living longer, and we should be less complicated with multi-morbidities. Not the case.
Not the case. Certainly in the post-war period has been a tremendous improvement in the health of older people. Older people are living longer, and also many of them are healthier. They often do have multiple conditions, but those conditions are often able to be treated and controlled. So maybe they've got hypertension or whatever, but they're on treatment for that. But what has changed since about 2010 is that the gains in life expectancy we had seen in older people have flattened, and in some cases have actually gone into reverse.
Now, when that news first broke, it came as a huge surprise to everybody, didn't they?
Well, it did, but
I guess you saw it coming, but nobody else
did.
Well,
we published a paper quite some time ago which looked at the geographical variations in the United Kingdom. But I have to say that the response to our work was essentially, let's try and find any excuse, any opportunity for how we can explain this away, statistical artifact, a bad flu year, whatever. But we had looked at all of these issues and we thought, well, the evidence that we can see suggests that there's something much more profound going on.
I guess we didn't want to believe it, did we?
There was a tremendous incentive to deny it. And of course there was a political dimension to that too, because it did coincide with the introduction of austerity measures.
Yeah, everybody tried to hang it on that. So, have you concluded anything?
I think what we can say is that we know quite a few things that it isn't. Of course, It isn't statistical artifact, and we always need to be careful with that, with data. You know, people migration rates and even small changes within the age bands that we use, a lot of technical issues that we have to overcome. Influenza clearly has played a role in some of the years, 2015 in particular, but that doesn't explain why so many people are actually dying from it. That's a secondary issue, and when we looked in detail at 2015, we did find that there was a very large spike which coincided with all of the indicators in the NHS basically falling over. There was a severe problem in the early months of that year.
The pressures on the NHS, do you think that's contributed to some early deaths?
It's difficult to tell exactly what has happened, because part of it could be the fact that more people are being admitted to hospital. What we have been looking at, we don't have very good evidence for this yet, but there's certainly some evidence that people who are who are in care homes and residential accommodation do seem to be particularly vulnerable, and we know that there have been massive cuts in social care spending, so I think we do need to look at that.
That is interesting, isn't it? Say, I think, is it 900,000 people who used to get support from social care no longer get it, and they're sort of refugees in our system wandering around. What's happened to them? Is it any wonder they turn up in A&E?
Well, there is certainly a clear problem there. In other work that we did, we looked at patients who were admitted from care homes, and we found that certainly from some of them, and this was a study in one part of London, a lot were being admitted very dehydrated, and they had a much higher risk of death once they were in hospital.
I mean,
almost 20% of people working in care homes are from other countries, and if we have as we will have a decline in migration as the United Kingdom becomes a much less welcoming place, then we can expect that the crisis will be even greater in the social care sector.
You end with a conclusion in the chapter. What do you have a forecast for us? How do you see the future?
We really need to understand what is happening. There is clearly an issue about our need for continued migration.
It's more complicated now, isn't it, than any time previously. I got that from your chapter, that whereas previously the business of forecasting is never easy, but it was easier. But now there is a confluence of things which make it more complicated.
I think as we look at what's happening to the older population, it is almost unprecedented to see increases in death rates in any age group. And when we see that historically, when we've seen that in societies like in the run-up to the collapse of the Soviet Union and other times, that's a very serious warning that something is wrong with society. And I think the implications of that will need to be looked at, particularly coming back to this point about precariousness and the continued impact of austerity.
It's a fascinating chapter, chapter 6. Please read it before you read the other chapters, because it's the foundation. Precariousness. Thank you very much.
Thank you.